My wife left a note. Don't look for me. I need freedom. So I didn't. I filed for divorce, froze the accounts, and went on vacation. 4 days later, she was waiting outside my lawyer's office in tears. I, 34M, came home from a 12-hour shift to find a folded piece of paper on our kitchen counter. The house felt different the moment I stepped inside, too quiet, too empty. Her car wasn't in the driveway, but that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the complete absence of her presence. No purse thrown carelessly on the couch, no shoes kicked off by the door, no coffee mug left half-empty on the counter. The note was written on our wedding stationery, the expensive cream paper with our initials embossed at the top that we'd gotten as a gift and never used. The irony wasn't lost on me. I need freedom. Don't look for me. Don't call the police. I'm safe, but I need space to figure out who I am without you. This isn't your fault, but I can't do this anymore. That was it. 8 years of marriage reduced to 4 sentences on fancy paper. I read it 3 times before the words actually registered. My first instinct was panic. Call her phone, call her sister, drive to her mother's house. But something about the tone stopped me cold. This wasn't a cry for help or a dramatic gesture. This was a calculated exit strategy. I walked through our house like a crime scene investigator. Her jewelry box was empty except for her wedding ring, which sat alone in the center compartment like an accusation. Half her clothes were gone, but she'd been strategic about it. Took enough that I'd notice, but not so much that it looked like she'd cleaned out everything. Her laptop was gone, but she'd left her iPad. Her goods suitcase was missing, but the carry-on was still in the closet. Everything about this felt planned, methodical. This wasn't a spontaneous breakdown. This was an escape plan that had been weeks, maybe months in the making. I sat on our bed, my bed now, I supposed, and tried to remember the last time we'd had a real conversation. Not the mundane exchanges about bills and schedules, but an actual conversation where we looked at each other and connected. I couldn't remember. The thing is, I wasn't even surprised. Hurt, angry, bewildered, yes. But not surprised. We'd been living like roommates for months, maybe longer. She'd grown distant, started working late more often, became irritable about things that had never bothered her before. I'd assumed it was stress from her job, maybe early midlife crisis stuff. I'd been wrong. That night, I did exactly what she asked. I didn't call anyone. I didn't file a missing person report. I didn't drive around town looking for her car. Instead, I sat in my kitchen, drank a beer, and made a list. The next morning, I called my lawyer. My attorney was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd handled my business incorporation years earlier. When I explained the situation, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked if I was sure I wanted to proceed immediately, if maybe I should wait to see if my wife came back or reached out. I told her about the wedding stationery, about the calculated way she'd packed, about months of growing apart that I'd ignored because it was easier than confronting the problem. I told her that someone who plans an exit strategy this carefully isn't coming back on their own, and I wasn't going to sit around waiting to be abandoned twice. She understood. Within 2 days, divorce papers were filed. I cited irreconcilable differences and abandonment. My lawyer was efficient. She'd seen this pattern before. Spouse disappears with a note, leaves the other person in limbo, usually comes back in a few weeks expecting everything to go back to normal. Her advice was simple. Protect yourself legally and financially, because people who abandon marriages rarely have clean motives. The financial part was uglier than I'd expected. We had joint accounts, joint credit cards, a joint mortgage. Everything was intertwined after 8 years together. My lawyer walked me through the process of freezing access to our savings and checking accounts, which required a court order due to the divorce filing. The credit cards were easier. I simply called and had her removed as an authorized user. The mortgage was trickier, but since it was in both names, I couldn't be removed without her signature, which meant she couldn't either. It felt ruthless, but my lawyer reminded me that my wife had made a unilateral decision to leave the marriage. I was simply making unilateral decisions to protect myself. The hardest part was calling her office. I didn't know if she'd arranged time off or simply stopped showing up. Her supervisor was confused and concerned. My wife had missed 2 days without calling in, which was completely unlike her. I explained that we were having marital problems and she was taking some time away, and that I didn't know when she'd be back. It felt strange to cover for someone who'd abandoned me, but I wasn't vindictive enough to torpedo her career. By Thursday, 3 days after finding the note, I felt oddly liberated. The house was cleaner without her there. I could watch what I wanted on television. I didn't have to negotiate dinner plans or weekend activities. For the first time in months, I wasn't walking on eggshells around someone else's mood. That's when I decided to take a vacation. I'd accrued weeks of unused time off. My wife had always been too busy or too stressed or too something to travel anywhere interesting. I booked a flight to Colorado, rented a cabin in the mountains, and planned to spend a week hiking and fishing and not thinking about marriage or abandonment or divorce papers. I left Friday morning. The house was secured. The neighbor had my emergency contact information, and my phone was set to forward important calls to my lawyer. I felt lighter than I had in years. The mountains were exactly what I needed. Clean air, clear water, no cell service for miles. I hiked during the day, cooked simple meals over a camp stove, and slept better than I had in months. For 4 days, I didn't think about her once. Monday morning, I drove back into town with cell service and 17 missed calls. 12 were from numbers I didn't recognize. 3 were from my lawyer. 2 were from my wife. I called my lawyer first. She sounded tired and slightly exasperated. My wife had shown up at the law office Friday afternoon, the same day I'd left for Colorado, demanding to speak with me. When told I wasn't available and wouldn't be for several days, she'd become increasingly agitated. She'd returned Saturday morning, then again Monday morning, apparently camping out in the parking lot. The divorce papers had been served to her mother's address, her most likely location according to the private investigator my lawyer had quietly hired. Her reaction, according to the process server, had been total shock. Apparently, she'd assumed I'd spend weeks or months trying to win her back, not immediately file for divorce. The account freezes had gone into effect over the weekend. She'd discovered this the hard way when her debit card was declined at a gas station. Her credit cards had been canceled Sunday evening. By Monday morning, she had no access to any of our shared finances. My lawyer asked if I wanted to speak with her. I said no, not yet. I wanted to go home, shower, and think. My wife could wait in the parking lot as long as she wanted. I'd waited 3 days for any communication from her, wondering if she was safe or dead or simply done with me. She could wait a few more hours. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through town. Part of me expected to see her car in my driveway, but it wasn't there. The house was exactly as I'd left it, secure and peaceful in mine. I showered, changed clothes, and made a sandwich. Then I called my lawyer and told her I'd meet with my wife, but only at the law office, with my attorney present, and only to discuss logistics of the divorce. I wasn't interested in reconciliation or explanations or apologies. When I arrived at the law office, she was sitting on the curb next to her car, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. She'd lost weight in the past week, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail that made her look younger and more vulnerable. When she saw me, she stood up quickly, and I could see she'd been crying. Inside the conference room, with my lawyer taking notes, she finally explained where she'd been and why she'd left. She'd driven to her college roommate's apartment 3 states away, planning to stay indefinitely while she figured out her next steps. She'd been having what she called an identity crisis, feeling trapped and suffocated by our routine and responsibilities. She'd convinced herself that the problem was our marriage, that she needed complete freedom to rediscover who she was as an individual. Her roommate, apparently, had been less supportive than expected. After listening to her complaints about feeling trapped in suburbia, the roommate had pointed out that she'd abandoned a good man and a stable life without even trying to fix the problems first. More importantly, the roommate was newly married herself and not interested in hosting a long-term guest who was running away from her problems. My wife had spent 4 days sleeping on a couch, eating takeout she couldn't really afford, and gradually realizing that geographic freedom wasn't the same as personal freedom. She'd expected to feel liberated and adventurous. Instead, she felt lonely and stupid. She'd driven home Thursday, planning to talk to me about working on our marriage, maybe trying counseling or therapy. She'd found the house empty and assumed I was working late. When I didn't come home that night, she'd called my office and learned I'd taken vacation time. She'd assumed I'd gone to stay with my brother or my parents, giving her space to think. Friday morning, she'd been served with divorce papers. That's when she'd realized I wasn't giving her space to think. I was ending our marriage. She sat across from me in that conference room, mascara streaked down her cheeks, asking why I hadn't tried to fight for us. Why I hadn't called or texted or begged her to come home. Why I'd immediately assumed our marriage was over instead of treating her note as a cry for help. I looked at her for a long moment, this woman I'd lived with for 8 years, and realized I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not love, not hate. Nothing. I told her that her note hadn't asked for space or time or counseling. It had told me she needed freedom and not to look for her. So I'd respected her wishes. I'd given her exactly what she'd asked for, complete freedom from our marriage, our shared responsibilities, and our shared finances. I explained that I'd spent 3 days not knowing if she was safe, not knowing if I should call police or hospitals or morgues. I'd spent 3 days wondering if our marriage was over or if she was having a breakdown or if she'd found someone else. Her note had given me no context, no timeline, no hope. So I'd acted accordingly. The look on her face when I explained this was something between shock and recognition. She'd written that note thinking it would make me realize how much I needed her, how empty my life would be without her. Instead, it had made me realize how much easier my life was when I wasn't constantly managing her emotions and expectations. She asked if I was willing to withdraw the divorce papers and try counseling. I said no. She asked if I was willing to unfreeze the accounts and let her move back home while we worked things out. I said no. She asked if there was anything she could say or do that would change my mind. I told her that 4 days ago, maybe, when I'd come home to that note, if she'd called that night or the next day to explain what she was feeling and what she needed, we might have been able to work something out. But she'd made a unilateral decision to abandon our marriage, and I'd made a unilateral decision to end it legally. The meeting lasted less than an hour. My lawyer outlined the divorce process, the timeline, and the asset division. My wife signed an acknowledgement that she'd been served and understood the proceedings. She asked for nothing, no alimony, no specific asset requests, no custody demands since we had no children. As we were leaving, she asked if I hated her. I told her honestly that I didn't hate her, but I didn't trust her either. Someone who could plan and execute an abandonment that calculated could do it again anytime she felt trapped or suffocated or misunderstood. I wasn't interested in spending the rest of my life wondering when she'd decide she needed freedom again. Update 1. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. It was remarkably clean. No contested assets, no disputes over property, no drawn-out negotiations. She moved in with her sister temporarily and found a new apartment across town. We divided our belongings like adults, though she seemed surprised that I wanted to keep most of the furniture and household items. I think she'd expected me to be too heartbroken to want reminders of our marriage. Truth was, I liked our furniture. I'd picked most of it out anyway. The most awkward part was explaining to our families and friends. Her parents were devastated and kept asking if there wasn't some way to fix things. My parents were quietly supportive but clearly confused by how quickly everything had happened. Our mutual friends were divided. Some thought I'd been too harsh. Others thought she'd gotten what she deserved. I didn't much care what anyone thought. I'd learned something valuable about myself during those 4 days in the mountains. I was happier alone than I'd been in a relationship with someone who saw me as an obstacle to her happiness. 3 months post-divorce, she started dating a coworker, someone from her office who she'd apparently been talking to about her marital problems before she left. When I heard about this through mutual friends, it confirmed what I'd suspected. Her need for freedom had been more about wanting to explore other options than about genuine self-discovery. I wasn't hurt by this revelation. If anything, it validated my decision not to fight for someone who'd already emotionally checked out of our marriage. Update 2. 6 months after the divorce, I got a text from her asking if we could meet for coffee. She'd broken up with the coworker and was doing some self-reflection about her choices. She wanted to apologize properly and maybe discuss the possibility of reconciliation. I declined politely but firmly. I'd spent 6 months rebuilding my life, rediscovering interests I'd neglected, and learning to enjoy my own company. I'd started hiking regularly, taken up photography, and was considering going back to school for an advanced degree. My house was organized the way I liked it. My finances were stable and entirely under my control, and I didn't miss the constant emotional management that had characterized the last years of our marriage. More importantly, I'd started dating someone new, a woman I'd met on a hiking trail who shared my interests and seemed genuinely excited about building something together rather than running away from problems. It was early, but it felt healthy in a way my marriage never had. I texted my ex-wife back with a simple message. I wished her well, but I'd moved on completely and wasn't interested in revisiting the past. I hoped she'd find whatever it was she was looking for, but it wouldn't be with me. She responded with a long message about regret and mistakes, and how she'd learned so much about herself. I read it once and deleted it without responding. Update 3. A year after the divorce, I heard through mutual friends that she was engaged to someone new, a guy she'd met at a yoga retreat who shared her interest in spiritual growth and authentic living. Apparently, she'd found her path to freedom and self-discovery. I felt nothing hearing this news except maybe mild relief that she'd found someone else to project her identity issues onto. My own life had settled into something I genuinely enjoyed. The woman I'd been dating had moved in with me after 8 months together, and we were talking about marriage, but approaching it as partners building something together, not as individuals trying to complete each other or escape ourselves. I'd finished my master's degree and gotten a promotion at work. My house had been renovated to reflect my actual tastes rather than compromised decisions. I'd developed friendships that weren't couple-based and hobbies that had nothing to do with managing someone else's emotions. The most surprising thing was how little I thought about my ex-wife or our marriage. It felt like something that had happened to someone else, a chapter in my life that was interesting but not particularly relevant to who I'd become. Sometimes people ask if I regret not fighting harder for my marriage, if I gave up too easily. The answer is no. Fighting for someone who's already given up is just postponing the inevitable. She'd made her choice when she wrote that note on our wedding stationery. I'd simply made mine faster than she'd expected. The real lesson wasn't about marriage or divorce or abandonment. It was about respecting people's decisions and accepting the consequences of your own. She'd wanted freedom, and I'd given it to her completely and permanently. I'd wanted stability and partnership, and I'd eventually found it with someone who wanted the same things. In the end, we both got exactly what we asked for. The only difference was that I'd been honest about what I was asking for from the beginning.